Okay, so hopefully you've had enough time to get through most of them. If you you can continue to finish up as you go. In most cases, well, let me say first, this was originally developed as a measure for relationships, and so a lot of the focus tends to be on marriage. But I think looking at it and understanding some of the things that we're going to talk about, I think that it's also helpful for helping us understand some approaches in our own personalities that perhaps would affect us when it comes to ministry. Now, looking at your totals at the bottom, in most cases, most people end up having one, perhaps two, that are the highest, and then two that are substantially lower than the others. Is there anyone who ended up with 3 or 4 all being about the same? Okay, so that says that you guys don't have personality. No, I'm just kidding. But in general, most people kind of wind up with one or two. So let's talk about what these represent, what this tells us. Now, while Myers-Briggs uses the letters to give you the personality profile, this version of a personality test uses animal descriptions to explain personalities. And so we'll talk a little bit about what each of these represent. So who had a column 1 was kind of their highest? Okay, a few of you. All right, the column 1 is represented by the lion. So this is the lion. The lion personality is someone who likes to take charge, the problem solver, is also competitive, enjoys change, and is confrontational. How many of you had column 2 was kind of your highest or one of your highest ones? Okay, column 2 is the otter. The otter is someone who's optimistic, energetic, a motivator, a future-oriented individual. How about column 3? Column 3 was your highest. Column 3 is the golden retriever. These are individuals who are warm and relational, loyal. They enjoy routine. They tend to be peacemakers, but they also have sensitive feelings. How about column 4? Column 4 is the beaver. That's where I end up. These are individuals who are accurate and precise. They're concerned about quality control. They are discerning and analytical. Now, those are the strengths of these individuals, or these personality types. And so you have this lion. The lion likes the authority, takes charge, is determined, confident, firm, enjoys the challenge, the problem solver, bold, purposeful, goal-driven, strong-willed and independent, persistent and action-oriented. How would that be a benefit in ministry? If you have that personality type.
You're the one to step up and do things when no one else wants to.
Right, so instead of sitting back waiting for somebody else to do it, the lion is out there, all right, let's get this done. All right, and let's do it now. But on the other hand, people with the lion personality type can sometimes be too direct or impatient with others. They tend to be, they can end up being too busy. Right? They'll take charge of everything. And so the lion can also be too demanding, pushy, can be overbearing, can step in front of others. Right? And so by being the first person out of the gate, that kind of prevents the opportunity for others who would, given a little bit more time, step up and serve, while the lion doesn't give them the opportunity. While the lion can be enterprising, it can also be someone who takes big risks or avoids relationships, overlooks the feelings of others by suggesting, do it now. Not, let's wait, let's talk about it. It's, let's just get it done. The strong will of the lion can also turn into stubbornness if you don't want to do it my way. They can be bossy, inflexible, and so there's the danger of that personality type being overbearing on someone. The otter is enthusiastic, takes risks, the visionary, and the motivator, energetic, encouraging people, very verbal, promoting people, friendly, enjoys popularity, they're fun-loving. You want the otter at your party. They're spontaneous, they enjoy change, they're creative. Why might this personality type, what does this personality type bring to ministry?
Diversity.
Okay, diversity. What else?
Kind of like an appealing feel to everything. Like you don't want to go somewhere everyone's just walking around with their head down and doing boring stuff, I guess. So that kind of makes it more enjoyable for everyone.
Okay, so the enjoyment that they bring, the fun that they bring, right? The appeal, right? And they're a motivator, right? So they encourage others as well, right? Instead of just being the only one, we want other people to be involved too. But the downside can be that you could run into being a manipulator, right? Recognizing you can motivate people, so you manipulate people. So there's always that danger to be aware of. Your energy can also turn into impatience if someone doesn't follow what you're suggesting. While you might be able to mix easily in a crowd, you might also, as an otter, have very shallow relationships. So you're not making true connections sometimes. Now, that doesn't mean just if you're an otter, that's how your relationships are going to be. That's just a danger that you need to watch for, that you need to watch out for, is that you don't just manipulate people. That it's not just a show, that you seriously enjoy what you're doing. Right? You're not hyping people up just to hype people up, that you enjoy and you want them to experience that enjoyment. There's the danger of being unrealistic and not recognizing some other possibilities, coming off as phony instead of truly inspirational. Right? And so that's a lot of the things, that's the possibility of a downside. The golden retriever is loyal, calm, sensitive, avoids confrontation, warm and relational, accommodating. On the other hand, well, before we get there, how would those characteristics be good in ministry?
Counseling.
Okay, counseling, all right. If you're engaged in counseling, you know, the people are going to want somebody that they can relate to, and you know, connecting with people. How else would those characteristics be helpful in ministry? Maybe not just in the actual counseling of somebody, but the recognizing of somebody else's hurt, somebody else's pain. Right? Where the lion might be just so focused on let's getting it done, the otter is just focused on, you know, hey, let's have a good time, let's get involved, let's do things. It's easy to sometimes overlook people in those situations, while the golden retriever is kind of looking out for people. Right? And so the recognition of the hurt. But the danger of the golden retriever personality is you can also be taken advantage of by people. Right? You can be a pushover. Sometimes the calmness of your personality could run into a lack of enthusiasm. Right? So you don't get enthusiastic about things. You end up staying in a rut. You become indecisive. right? And you try to, in trying to avoid confrontation, you don't really get involved in things that sometimes have to be confrontational. Finally, the beaver. The beaver is the person who reads all the instructions. They're accurate, they're consistent, they're reserved, they're predictable, they're orderly, factual, sometimes a perfectionist, analytical, inquisitive. How can those things be useful in ministry? That's the characteristic.
Finances.
Okay, right. Definitely in keeping track of the finances of the ministry. How else might the
Maybe looking at exactly what the Bible says to do.
okay, so
Precision with the Bible.
Okay, so close attention to the Bible and teaching. I think also, if you're involved in planning a big event, the beaver type personality is the person who's going to make sure everything is done. Have we done these things? But on the other hand, the perfectionism can be a relationship killer if you're asking for perfection in yourself and others. All right, that can lead to an inflexibility. That you're inflexible as an individual. You lose the forest for the trees, and so the beaver is focused on the trees, right? The analytical component, but you lose the big picture sometimes. Possibly, you can be pushy, boring, stubborn, and so we need to recognize those dangers as well. In thinking about how these types communicate, this is an important aspect of ministry. And again, while the test was predominantly for relationships and marriage, there's some important things to recognize as well. As a lion, you would tend to be direct. And you're not kind of trying to so-called beat around the bush. You're not trying to tangentially say something. You're direct. And often the communication you're offering is one way. You're focused on telling somebody something instead of any sort of two-way communication. But the weakness in communication is you may not be as good of a listener. And it's important in ministry that you listen to others. So it's good that you're out there, you're talking, you're speaking, right? You're going forward, right? You want to get things done, achieve things, but you sometimes have to recognize maybe you're not listening to others. The otter as well, the communication that otter gives is inspirational, potentially. It's optimistic, it's enthusiastic, but it too tends to be one way. Right? That's not necessarily a bad thing unless we go too far in the extreme, right, in trying to manipulate someone. The golden retriever tends to be more indirect in saying things. So that can be, the golden retriever tends to be a great listener as well, but is not as, sometimes you need to directly tell somebody something, right? And so talking about something indirectly may not communicate what you need to communicate. The beaver, very factual, good listener when it comes to tasks. All right, this is what we need to do, what are you going to do, right? And so the listener as far as task-oriented. But your desire for detail can frustrate others. So we have to recognize that the personalities we bring to ministry can be of great benefit to whatever service we're providing. But there's always the danger as well that some of those same characteristics can be negatives. Right? And so we want to make sure we are aware of ourselves and thinking about ourselves. Okay, if something comes up, I want to be the first one out there doing it, jumping up. I'm going to sign up. but maybe there needs to be, maybe I need to step back sometimes and allow other people to do some things. Or maybe I need to be careful on how I say things so it doesn't come off as. And so being aware of our characteristics, being aware of our personalities is a very important component of, serving people and serving God well. So hold on to those sheets as you prepare for your philosophy of ministry, right? Because that should be something that goes into some things you need to watch out for, things you need to pay attention to, but also some characteristics that you have that could be of good benefit. And so thinking about, now that I've talked about these things, I've read about these things, I have this personality, what does this tell you about who you are? And these are rhetorical questions. You don't have to share them. But what does this tell me about who I am? And what does this tell me about ministry? Both things that positively I need to be aware of and things that are negative, right? As a golden retriever or a beaver, I might want to be the person that kind of sits back. So sometimes I need to overcome that, right? And so instead of, when I see somebody that needs help, I might tend to, as a beaver, wait for somebody else to take care of it. Right? It's too messy, I don't want to get involved. All right? Well, maybe I need to overcome that. Or as a lion, right? Or as a beaver, or a golden retriever or an otter, I need to look at some things and say, what is it that I need to overcome? Where do I need to draw back? Questions, comments, cries of disbelief. Another important aspect as we think about personality, the person as a minister, right, is the things that I need to be aware of for my own self and my own spiritual welfare, is that I need to maintain and develop devotional habits. While getting a degree, the academic component, and learning all the things that you're going to learn academically is very good. I as a professor, right, I'm a professor because I love academics. And I think the academic component is something that sometimes gets lost in ministry. But we can focus too much on academics and lose, and other types of logistical things related to ministry, and lose our own personal connection. And so while we might be able to translate a Greek sentence, parse a Hebrew verb, if these things do not mean anything to me, the text doesn't mean anything to me, if I don't make sure I cultivate my relationship with God, then I'm losing out, and those things that I think are so important, the academic side, are really kind of worthless. And so as a minister, you also have to make time to devote yourself to certain practices and habits. Often these are referred to, or have been referred to in other traditions at other times as spiritual disciplines. One of the things that we sometimes lose about Christianity is there is an aspect of Christianity that is discipline. Now, sometimes that discipline can turn into regimented, and I got to do these certain things in certain ways and at certain times, and so it can be taken to the extreme. But we can also lose the sight of the spiritual discipline. I've served on a couple of committees here related to chapel. And I don't believe they did one last year, but in previous years they've done chapel surveys, where they've asked people to, ask students to offer insights on chapel, what's been offered in chapel, speakers, the setup. We're seeing some of the results of that, with how the gym is set up and those kind of things. But one thing that comes up frequently is that students don't like the idea of being forced to go to chapel, that I'm required to go to chapel. And I can understand that, right? Because on one hand, if you've grown up in a religious body, a church, you've probably heard that we shouldn't look at worship as a requirement, but as an opportunity, right? Which is true. Right? That worship, we shouldn't look at worship as something we begrudgingly give God, but something we willingly and lovingly give God. And so when you come to a Christian college, this idea of being required to go to chapel can be a difficult one. But one of the things we often lose, and this is part of where the spiritual discipline component connects to something like chapel, is that sometimes we forget that if certain things aren't required, we don't ever gain the discipline of doing them. Because we can talk about, we should be studying the Bible more, we should be praying more, we should be worshiping more. But if we don't discipline ourselves to do that, they're not going to get done. So, for example, let me ask you a rhetorical question. I'm not asking for a show of hands. I'm not asking for you to answer. But how many of us would say, I have the absolute best prayer life? Or how many of us would say, I wish my prayer life was better? Probably most of us would say, I wish my prayer life was better. And here we are gathered as people that are going into ministry. Right? We're in ministry already. And so we ourselves think prayer is important. Most Christians would say that, but nearly all Christians will say, I wish my prayer life was better. Why? Because we have to recognize, we have to discipline ourselves to do these things. Right? I'm not saying that as someone whose prayer life is excellent either. I follow Faulkner on this as well. If I don't discipline myself to engage in these practices, I will not do them. Which means sometimes I have to just say, I'm setting aside this time, or I'm setting aside this part of my day to do this. And there's something that cries out against that as, well, that's too rigid, that's too frozen, that's not what it's all about. But if I don't have that set time to do it, I'm not going to do it. Because there's so much else that pushes in on our lives. And a perfect example of this, going back to the chapel issue, is that when you look at those people who do not have to go to chapel, how often are they actually there? And so part of the reason that it's required is that as a Christian university, we're trying to help students develop the habits of these kind of things, regular prayer and worship with a larger community. Now, it comes off as you're required to go to chapel these days, right? And so maybe it needs to be communicated better. But we lose this idea of spiritual discipline. And if we don't discipline our lives to do these things, we will lose them. And that's true for ministers as much as it is for anyone else.